Hey, you guys, we got another great one. Stay tuned. Everyone, welcome to The Empire, where we like to engage with everyone from pastors to actors, rappers to trappers, and everyone in between. My name is Antonio D. Miles. I am your host for today. And yes, we have another great guest. And this gentleman who's going to be joining us today is Ted Burnett. He is the VP of the NAACP Pomona Valley version district. And he is also on the board of directors of the Poor People's Campaign that does the Inland Empire. And let's get right into this gentleman. And his name again is Ted Burnett. Welcome to The Empire, Ted.
Thank you for having me.
Man, so glad to have you, sir. How you been?
I can't complain. If you don't complain about nothing, then it's all good.
Got you. You got you. So you stub your toe, you just keep it to yourself.
Keep it to myself, unless if it hurt more, then I go to the doctor. Thank God for health care.
Got you. So you complain to someone who gets paid to listen to you complain.
Exactly. As long as I pay that copay, right?
That part. Hey, doctor, you're gonna hear my complaint, but you're gonna get paid. So my toe hurt. Listen. Got you. Well, Ted, let's get right into it, man. For people who don't know who you are and the things that you do, can you please tell all of us who you are and the things that you do?
Good afternoon. My name is Ted Burnett, and I am the second vice president of the Pomona Valley NAACP, which is the oldest civil rights group in the United States. We at Pomona Valley, we service 5 cities in San Bernardino County and 5 cities in LA County, including Pomona, Ontario, Diamond Bar, Claremont, and etc. And I'm also on the board of directors of the Poor People's Campaign in the Empire, and also we have a statewide chapter where I serve as on the board of directors. And then we also have the Ontario Futures Alliance, which is a great organization that we have that includes LULAC, which is a Latino civil rights group, MALO, which is a Tongan civil rights group, and Pitzer College, LULAC, which and includes other organizations that I had mentioned, along with Poor People's Campaign. And we are a collaboration of people that comes together to fight social justice. And instead of us separating and fighting over peanuts, we get together and make peanut butter.
I love that, and we all know who invented peanut butter, right?
Exactly.
Gotcha. It's so awesome. And for those who are watching, please type a 1 in the chat if you guys can hear us and we sound clear, we look good. Just make sure that we just want to make sure everything looks good and sounds good. And if you're just joining us, we're talking with Ted Burnett, who is VP of the NAACP and also on the board of directors of, the Poor People's Alliance. And he's also with the Ontario Future Alliance. So we're so great to have everybody here with us. And so Ted, have you noticed the difference? Because you mentioned people would be fighting over peanuts, right? Like, we want this, we want that. Have you seen a difference in the community as opposed to everybody fighting for different things as opposed to fighting for the same thing together? Have you seen a difference in what the outcome is?
I've seen over the years people starting to understand that the system pits us against each other. And while 1% of the population in the world owns most of the wealth, we as people of color and the poor and the working poor fight over the scraps. And so when you come together in a fusion movement, one of the things that you have to understand, there's an intersectionality that exists from all of us, that we have common needs and common goals and common ideology on what we want to do. And so when you come together as a group and you are not pointing fingers at that other group that you're trying to oppress, then people say, oh my God, they have the same values that I have. They have the same outlook that I have. They want to send their kids to college like I do. And so once we realize that and then come together, then we have a better understanding that our enemy is not one another, because that person don't look like me or share the same faith as me, but the fact that the system perpetuates that. And if we come together, which I've seen in the fusion movement of people coming together, we have common goals, so that we put all of our resources into try to be successful and make sure that everyone benefits from it. So when you uh, start that fusion movement, then everybody benefits that.
I love that, and
A lot of changes.
and I love that because it's so true, because the whole tactic of divide and conquer has always worked, will always can always work. But when people get together and are together, they're so much more powerful to get. They're so much more powerful, right? What is it? Power in numbers, as they say.
Yeah.
You know, Ted, can you give us all, as brief as you can, a story of where you grew up, how you grew up, all the way up to the man that you are today? If you can give us a brief story about all that for us.
Well, I grew up outside of Chicago in the town called Urbana-Champaign, and I grew up in Urbana, and my relatives came to from the South in Mississippi because they wanted to get away from the oppression, and a lot of people who was from Mississippi actually came from the South to the big cities because there was jobs and opportunities, and it was part of the new industrial revolution and mechanism. And so my people came, I'm sure, from the cause of, if people remember the great Mississippi flood of 1927, where they flooded, the government opened up the levees, and it flooded the black lands, and they were all kept in camps while their land was flooded. And so people said, why should I stay here and deal with no job? My land is flooded, everything is gone. We're going to go and migrate. And so there was a great migration of blacks from Mississippi to places like Detroit and Chicago. And my parents and grandparents migrated that way. And, they actually, when they found a job, when somebody in the family found a job, they said, okay, Joe, you come here, and then you can get a job, and we can all live together, and then you bring your family on. And so I come from a background of people who, my great grandmother was educated on the plantation so that she can teach the black kids and the white kids on the plantation. So she went to teachers college, but when she came to the North, they wouldn't let her use that education there. And so education has always been a part of my family. And so my family on my mother's side, which was the Townsends, was relatives of Fannie Lou Hamer Townsend. So there's always been activism and education in my family. And so when we moved with our uncle, great uncle from the North, he settled in Chicago, and we moved down to Urbana. And so my parents was married, and they had they was working for the laundry and everything else. And then when the great change came of civil rights and stuff, then they got better jobs in working for the university and also General Motors, which was a union job. And so at that time when I was growing up, they had projects. If people don't, all California know about projects, they had projects there. And so we all started living in the projects, but eventually, because of the changes in the civil rights movement, we were able to purchase a home in the first Black subdivision in Urbana, which they never offered before because of discrimination and redlining. And so my mother was always a spirited activist for change, even at a young age and everything else when she migrated from Mississippi. And so she and the people from Ellis Drive um, uh, knew that there was something wrong when kids couldn't go to other kids' schools of different races and everything else. So they fought the Ellis Drive 6, I think it was. They fought to desegregate the school districts. There was no other school district that was desegregated in the state of Illinois, and they fought together to desegregate the school district, which was unheard of then. So that was the first school district in the state of Illinois that was desegregated in 1966. And later on, 2 years later, my mother ran for the school board and was the first Black lady elected to the school board in Urbana. And that's where I get my activism from, because of the fact, yeah.
Okay. And just for all you guys who are just coming in, we are here today with Ted Burnett, who is VP of the NAACP Pomona Valley area and board directors, of the Poor People's Campaign for the Inland Empire. And he's telling us a little bit about his life story. And Ted, did you always know that you wanted to be into activism? Or do you remember when you're like, you know what, I really want to get into activism? Do you know when that hit you?
Well, it hit me when they start busing us to the white schools. And when we got to the schools, it was angry white parents outside the school protesting and everything else like that. And I was always wondering, why are they so mean, and why are they so forceful in not wanting us there? And so my mom always talked to us about the civil rights movement. And growing up, when Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, H. Rap Brown, I grew up in that era that I saw them on TV and heard of them. So it wasn't something that I read out of history books. It was something that I lived. And
so what year was it when you were being bused to these white schools? What year is this?
1966.
1966.
I know I look young and everything else like that, but yes, it was 1966.
Gotcha. Okay. You know, I found out recently, and I think it's probably the way the history books was, but like integration was kind of like mandatory. It wasn't a choice. Am I correct?
Right. At once the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, and got passed in Thurgood Marshall and on the Supreme Court. He was the one who worked for the NAACP that helped who was the leading lawyer on that case. And once that happened, then the Attorney General of the United States started rolling over saying people need to start integrating schools, but people fought it and said, we don't care. We're going to stay with what we are. So when my mother and a group of other parents fought it, because there was a study done at the University of Illinois that said that people of color, kids do better when they're around a different environment. And so that's when they went and took it to the school board and got it passed. But it was a lot of opposition to it.
Gotcha. And what grade were you in 66?
I think I was 6 years old. And then once they figured out where the kids was going to go and everything else, that next year in 67 is when I got bused to Yankee Ridge School, which was a magnet school for all the professors and rich people. So I'm thankful that they picked me to go to that school district, because I learned so much about many cultures, because my friends was like, and this is how I remember it. I had a friend named Fernando Gonzalez who was from South America. I had Kaya and Ketty Connect who was from Russia. I had Darren Llewellyn, who his father was a Jesuit priest. I had Charles Goodloe, whose father was a diplomat from South Africa. And so all these people that I grew up with opened up to me, and I spent a lot of time on my weekends. I never stayed home because it was some of them their first experiences having a Black friend. So I stayed over their house every weekend. For the first year, I was always in their neighborhoods at their friend's house and everything else like that. So it was an experience for me to see people from all different cultures and walks of life, and not to be intimidated by anyone, because I had to understand that my mother instilled in me that I was from the same background as them. It's just their education was different. And so I excelled in the accelerated classes and everything else like that. And so it was quite an experience, considering during the 60s, not everybody was cool with it or kosher with it.
Yeah, and so there, I guess there was a benefit to the integration going to school. You met more people, you got more culturally involved, right? But
And I wasn't intimidated by white people or anything else, because there were some people at that time who thought, oh well, back then, if in the South, you didn't look a white person in the eye, you had a separate drinking fountain and everything else like that. And so it was like a separate but equal type of situation.
Yeah. But the good thing, like you were saying, was that you were able to learn more about cultures and other people by doing it. So what? So you said your first influence of being an activist was during 66, 67. So what was your first move actually towards activism, like physical move? Do you remember that era, that year, what you did?
Yeah, so my mother decided to run for school board, and we got a lot of threats and everything else, and she sat down and explained us that we need to do activism. And so the my first level of activism is that my parents had an organization where they brought people from different left-leaning liberals and Jewish community groups, and the Blacks all got together. And so we started working with their programs to try to let everybody else understand that integration was good and desegregation was good, and that if we work together, we would be able to accomplish more. So that was my first taste of that, picketing and everything else like that. Because when I was with my parents, when they was out there picketing, they brought us along. So it's something that we learned at a very young age. And then in 1968, when my mother ran for school board and won, we did all her campaigning, passing out flyers, going to meetings and everything else, and educating the community so that she could win. And she was first Black lady elected to the school board at that time. And so that it was at a very young age that I was involved with that. And then I think she won like 4 terms. So at age, I think 15, I was helped running her campaign to run for office.
That's so cool that she had you active and moving. I can tell your mother was a really big influence on your life and things like that. And I wanted to mention something because, I wasn't born in that era of the civil rights movement and stuff like that. But I remember talking to a friend's mom of mine who was from the South, Memphis, and she said that at the time, Martin Luther King seemed like a troublemaker because he was, trying to change things. And it was just a whole different perspective that I never realized, that some people were just like comfortable how life was. And Martin Luther King among, Malcolm X, but she was saying like Martin Luther King, we didn't like him because he was trying to change things. Was that like a common thought process?
There was a common theme around people because they were comfortable in the situation that they're in, and they said, "Hey, the white folks treat us good. Let's not rock the boat." But understand that his people should read letters from a Birmingham jail that he wrote, and he wrote that in saying that, "Hold on, the preachers and the community invited me here. Now you fighting to want me to leave. That's not the concept of being able to bring people together." And so, yeah, there was a lot of resistance for him to go into some black communities and be able to fight it, because then that means they thought that the oppression would get worse because he's there, when revolution that he was bringing and change actually helped it. So I understand what you mean about Memphis, because my grandparents from Memphis, and they didn't play that down south. That it was really bad down there. Even when he came to in the early 60s, came to Chicago, and they pelted him with rocks and everything else when he went to the park in the Jewish neighborhood. But he said that he actually made a quote that the sweltering racism is worse in Chicago than it was down south. So there was a movement where people were scared and wanted to keep things going the same way and said, "Hey, don't come here." So that's correct, that was some parts of movement. But for the people who wanted real change, they welcomed Dr. King and his message, and Ralph Abernathy and the Southern Christian Leadership Council and many other groups to be able to form a movement to be able to bring it for everybody. And see, people need to understand that not only did blacks benefit from the civil rights, if it wasn't for Dr. King and the civil rights movement, there would never been the Immigration Act of 1965, where they were able to bring more people from South America and Central America and Arab people and gays and lesbians into this country, because previously the immigration system was so racist and bigoted with structural systemic racism. They didn't allow those people of color to come in. But once he worked with to bring that in and pass that, that's when a lot of people were able to come into the country from different races and different colors and across Europe and the Middle East.
Wow. And it's so true. And folks, if you guys are just tuning in, we're sitting down talking with Ted Burnett, who is VP of the Poor People's Campaign. VP of the NAACP division in Pomona, and on the board of directors for the Poor People's Campaign and many other things. And if you guys are watching the video, please like the video. It helps us a lot. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. We do a lot of great work out here, so we appreciate everybody here. If you guys can hear us, type a 1 in the chat, anything like that. But yeah, Ted, I'd love for you sharing that with us. And I kind of want to move forward with, you being on the board of directors of the Poor People's Campaign. Can you tell us what is the Poor People's Campaign for people who might not know what that is?
So the Poor People's Campaign first started out of ideas of mobilizing people across the United States to fight for poor and low income people. And that's actually started in 1967, and they had a march on Washington. And so all the different organizations was making a pilgrimage to make a march on Washington. And Dr. King, weeks before the Poor People Campaign that started in 1967 to 68, he went and made a stopover in Memphis because of the garbage workers strike. And so they were dealing with the unions there in the city in Memphis. And so some garbage workers had got crushed in garbage. If you know about the hydraulics from the old garbage trucks, they had malfunction, and a couple of black union members got killed. and crushed. And so he went to Memphis to try to fight for not only for safety, economic justice, and independence, but he wanted to help them out. And that's when he got assassinated. And so instead of letting the movement die with Dr. King, Reverend Abernathy, and the pilgrimage of different people around the United States still had the march on Washington, and they spent 6 weeks in Washington to protest the plight of the poor, demilitarization, healthcare, poverty, and everything else like that. And they spent 6 weeks there. They were there so long, and so many people wanted to help them out that the post office gave them their own zip code, 20013. And so after they spent 6 weeks on at the Capitol, things dissipated with the Poor People campaign, and so it was revitalized almost like in 2016, 2017 by Dr. William Barber, Bishop Barber, and Pastor Liz Theo Harris. And the same concepts that Dr. King did with the Poor People's campaign are now the pillars of what is going on today. And the thing is, the same characteristics of poverty, demilitarization, healthcare, wages, affordable wages, homophobic, xenophobia, dog whistle politics, the same thing that they was fighting for then, 50, 60 years later, we're fighting for the same thing. And that was the revitalization of the Poor People's Campaign that got us where we are today. And actually, I think we started the California movement like in 2017, 2018, and out of LA.
Okay. What's so basically still fighting for the same thing over 50 years ago? That's unfortunate. What's some of the biggest things that are on the agenda for the Poor People's Campaign to attack? What's one of the biggest things?
There's 140 poor people and low-income people in the United States from every walk of life and for every faith, religion, Black, white, Latino, poor whites in the Appalachian Mountain, Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. Poverty is the main course, and that we're one of the richest nations in the world, and we have 140 million poor and low-income people who live there. So we demand that the politics and the policies that oppress people through laws and legislation prioritize the poor. And we're also pushing for a minimum wage. And so in other states, minimum wages, we're pushing for at least $15 an hour. But a lot of the southern states that had slaves still only make $7.25 an hour, which is the federal minimum wage. And in 2008 and 2009, the federal minimum wage was $6.55. So it only went up from $6.55 to $7.25. So it's hard for people to be able to pay their rent, take care of their children, provide, have health care without working 2.5 jobs.
Yeah, I actually think the minimum wage, I think in the state of California, is now $20 an hour.
Yes, if you have 60 or more fast food restaurants, then it goes to effect. But if it's less than that, then it merges up after a couple of years to reach that $20 an hour.
Gotcha. So what's your idea? Because what happened is that a lot of people have been complaining about low wages, but they've recently risen their wage, but then people are getting laid off and getting replaced by AI and robotics. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think that if technology has always been an issue in America, once you went from picking cotton to the cotton gin to industrial revolution, there's always been technology. But the main part is that if you are looking for robotics and AI, then there needs to be a direct transition from the mechanism part of it to be able to retrain people into different walks of life and jobs and everything else like that. So we can't stop AI and mechanism, but we can retrain the people to be able to uh, uh, go into a different course of work, because when you do that, you not only invest in the community, you invest in the people, and you invest in families so that they'll be able to make it. So, people can put their heads in the sand, but there are ways in job training and vocational education, healthcare, communication that people can be able to make it there. So it's just being able to invest in those communities.
I completely agree. With the change, you need to invest in being educated to move with the change, right? Like we were in horse and buggy, we went to cars, so we had to train people on how to work on cars and stuff like that. I completely agree. At the training needs to be evolved. And when it goes back to the Poor People's Campaign, can you explain what Third Reconstruction Agenda is? And
I'm glad you asked. Keep on going.
And can you give us a plan on how to end poverty? So it's a two-part question. Can you explain what Third Reconstruction Agenda is, and can you give us a good plan on how to end poverty, if that's even a possibility?
Okay, the Third Reconstruction. So in order to understand about the Third Reconstruction, and give me a minute because I'm gonna give you some background on the history on it. In order to go for a Third Reconstruction, you have to understand what the Second Reconstruction and the First Reconstruction was.
Hit us with it.
And the First Reconstruction came out of slavery when people they had the Emancipation Proclamation and the freedom of the slaves. And in order to understand about the First Reconstruction, you have to understand that wasn't a choice to do the right thing by the United States government. It was an economic choice, because when you have they did a census of 1860, and they found out that in the next 15 to 20 years, the way that they breeded slaves for business, that the black slaves would outnumber the whites. And so you have places like Alabama that had like 500,000 whites and 420,000 slaves. You have Arkansas, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, especially Mississippi. In Mississippi, they had 425,000 slaves and 375,000 whites. So they looked at that census and said, oh my God, if we don't do that, even though they count as 1/3 people, then they're going to be able to take over. So they said, instead of doing the right thing, they said, what can we do to stop? Because we have to breed the slaves in order to conduct our business, and whites are not having kids like they did. So they started with the Immigration Act of 1855 to 1955, where they brought in 23 million white European peasants from Europe to balance out the population. And not only did they bring them into this country through Ellis Island, which everybody can read the history, they brought them in and gave them land under the Homestead Act that they had stolen from the Native Americans, and the 40 acres of mule that they didn't get from the blacks. Not only did they give them land, they helped them mechanize and gave them low interest loans and to be able to mechanize their farming. So they got an advantage over the people who was already here with the Native Americans and the blacks. And so when people talk about, well, my parents came on Ellis Island and they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, and I tell people, hold on, the blacks the one who invented the boot. If it wasn't for the blacks, there wouldn't be our country wouldn't be a wealthy country, because they operated under free labor. So when you talk about the first Reconstruction, you talk about a systematic point of trying to continue to oppress the blacks, even when they were out of slavery after 1865. Because then they said, oh, there's a complete advantage for us to have them be able to vote. So in 1870, they passed where black men could vote, but not black women. And so in that course, the black men who voted, over 600,000 black men voted in that election. And that election helped elect Hiram Rose Revel, who was the first black senator from Mississippi who was elected, even though they didn't seat him because he was black. So you have the first Reconstruction, and with the Freedmen's Bureau to set up to help black assimilate, but that was short-lived because once 1877 passed, they removed the troops out of the South. They got rid of the Freedmen's Bureau and defunded it, and then Jim Crow came. So that's the first part of the first Reconstruction. The second Reconstruction came out of the Civil Rights Movement with Martin Luther King and them wanting to spend money on schooling, and the Brown versus Board of Education, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Civil Rights Act of 1965. So all of these things came in the second revolution, where people talk race, but they use code language to be able to do to deal with the black. And so once that happened, you had a fusion movement that took place where poor whites, black, Latinos, and Jewish people all came together to fight for that. Because when people talk about the Civil Rights Movement, there wasn't just black people, there was people from all countries. There was the abolitionists of the first Reconstruction. There was Viola Lewusa, who died on her way to Alabama by the Klan. There was Reverend James Reeve from the Universalist Church. There was all many different people who was involved that who wanted to do the right thing. And so when we talk about the second Reconstruction, the third Reconstruction need to be a blueprint of what happened first with us all with an intersectionality. And the third Reconstruction have to involve people coming together in fusion politics and willing to change and to challenge the system. So we need a third Reconstruction where we bring everybody together. And that's my whole concept with the Ontario Futures Alliance. We're saying, instead of us fighting over peanuts, shout out to George Washington Carver.
There we go.
Fighting over peanuts, we need to come together and make peanut butter. So that's what it is. Taking what we learned in the South in the first Reconstruction and the second Reconstruction, maneuver it and pivot and being able to bring up the concepts that has always kept us back in the past. That's the third Reconstruction. And then I'm going to answer your thing about poverty, right?
I want to say something really quick.
Okay.
Wow, it's super amazing. And we'll definitely get into the Ontario Future Alliance. But you said they use code language. Can you explain some code language that they use?
Instead of it's camouflage, dog whistle politics. When they said that Obama was a food stamp president, black people are aggressive, they're loud, they're lazy, they only like watermelon. Those are code language. And what people don't understand is about watermelon, blacks really didn't like watermelon. But when the Emancipation Proclamation came and the Freedmen's Bureau gave them, that was a keeper of all their birth records and everything else like that. The Freedmen's Bureau gave them seeds to plant so that they can become self-sufficient. And so watermelon was a good thing that they can sell on the open market, and it didn't take that much farming. So the Freedmen's Bureau gave them watermelon. And so when they grew the crops on their own, instead of sharecropping, they were able to take the watermelon, sell it, get money, and then buy more seeds from other things. So it wasn't the concept of blacks like watermelon. It was just a good business decision to be able to sell it, that you can have something to sell on the marketplace. So you see how these code language got people thinking that, oh, this is the way it is. But when it is, it's just another way of being racist.
I got you. I got you. And for those of you guys just tuning in, we're talking to Ted Burnett here. We're getting really deep. We just got talking about the third Reconstruction era. And if you're just jumping in, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. We got some more great things happening. And so, Ted, you wanted to kind of explain, just give us like one idea of a plan on how to end poverty, if that's even possible to possibly end poverty.
Let me give you an example. The child tax credit.
What is that?
The child tax credit was introduced by the Biden administration during COVID to offset poverty for the poor and poor mothers. So not only did you get a tax credit at the end of the year, they gave you a stipend every month to be able to spend on your bills and take care of your bills. And the child tax credit was successful. It actually lifted people out of poverty. But then when it was set to expire, none of the Democrats had enough kahunas to push for it to continue. And I know they just revisited it a couple of months ago and everything else, but the child tax credit, the statistics prove that it lifted people out of poverty, and that people didn't just spend their money on malt liquor and menthol cigarettes like the dog whistle politics say. They use it to pay their rent. They use it to provide food for their kids and everything else. And it was a great success. And they looked at the numbers and said, oh my God, it lifted people out of poverty. We can't have this. And then they did away with it. That's the number one way in the short term and the long term that you can lift people out of poverty, by supporting the child tax credit. Because Black women get a bad rap. Not only are they oppressed by the system of through history for Black women, they were oppressed by Black men. I mean, white women, white men, and Black men have control over that whole situation with the gender equity. And so when you have a single mother with 4 kids, all she's trying to do is provide a roof over her head, and she's working 2.5 jobs, not being able to be home with the kids and everything else because she's working to take care of the family. And so when you have the tax credit, it lifted people out of poverty, Blacks, whites, poor whites, Latinos, and everything else. And that would be the first thing that they need to revisit in doing it. With the richest world in the nation in the world, we should reintroduce the child tax credit so that people will be able to start with poverty. Because when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises.
Got you. So we don't believe in Reaganomics here.
No.
Reaganomics, folks, is basically the top-down principle, if you didn't know. I also wanted to ask you, like, so why do you think they took it back, and why don't you think why haven't they brought it back? What's your opinion? Why did they take it away?
Well,
from your opinion.
My opinion is they saw the numbers, and the structural systemic racism part of it is that if I give the people of color and the poor a chance to lift themselves out of poverty, then they're going to start wanting to get an education. And then if they want to get an education, then they want to live in better neighborhoods. And if they want to live in better neighborhoods, then we don't have a working class to be able to do our dirty work and to send people to the military, and they won't have options. So it's a point of control, because the numbers don't lie. They don't, about how much the child tax credit has lifted people out of poverty. And also, along with the child tax credit, they also supplemented people's medical. And so people have access to health care and was insured, because we have like 87 million people in this country who are uninsured and underinsured. And since the pandemic funding left, people are going to lose. Over 15 million people are in the process of losing their access to affordable health because they had the federal pandemic emergency where they gave funds. So you can see that if you give people hope, then they will move to the next step to want to do better, and that the system don't want that to happen.
Gotcha. And I guess I'll be a little bit of devil's advocate here. Some people say that systematic racism doesn't exist. What do you think? Do you think it really exists, or you think it's all a bunch of fairy tales and it's just in people's minds?
If it didn't exist, why do they fight so hard to stop learning? Because learning is it. When they say, oh, critical race theory and and DEI, and I'm like, hold on. They don't teach critical race theory in grade school or middle school or high school. It's a college curriculum. It is a college curriculum. And so they want to be able to stop people from learning, because then they can put their heads in the sand and then they don't have to deal with the guilt, because the poverty is a moral issue. It's not about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. And in my faith tradition, Jesus said, if you do it unto the least of me, you also do it unto me. The poor you're going to have with you always. So if you don't educate people on their history, then they won't be able to understand where the power dynamics were before, because it's not about, it's about race and class. People always forget the point that it's a class structure. And so when you talk about that and you talk about history, you talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, where they kicked the Chinese out of the country, but they did bring them in after the Emancipation Proclamation to replace the slaves, because those Chinese people came from Cuba where they was doing sugar cane. So they needed a replacement for the black slaves who got free. So they brought the Chinese in. And then once the Chinese started taking over, they came up with the Exclusion Act of 1882 to kick them out of the country. Then they talked about, okay, let's bring in the Mexican people into this country so that they can do the work. And then they say, oh my God, the Depression hit, and they started the repatriation of 1929, where they kicked Mexican immigrants out of this country and deported 100,000 Mexican Americans who were citizens out with them. Then we talk about the Bracero program in the 1950s, when they did the same thing, on and on and on and on. So when they talk about structural systemic racism, people of color and the poor has always suffered from it. But if you don't teach the history about what happened in the past, then you revisit it, the knowledge of people not knowing what's going on, because history don't repeat itself. People repeat history.
I love that. And so it's not only a race thing, but it's also a class thing. And
class, your eyes went up. Your eyes went up then when you said a class thing, because it is about class. Because here's the thing: if you're rich and you black or Mexican or Asian and everything else, you get the benefits of being able to pay for a good education, a good housing, to get yourself out of jail and everything else like that. That's why all those rappers love Trump with his tax credit that he gave to people in 2017, which is the biggest transfer of wealth in this country, when they gave those tax credits. Now the tax credit for us, common American, they expired. and was never renewed, but the businesses were kept on. So if you rich, you benefit from it. So it is race and class.
Yeah. And
They're
sometimes they interchange.
inextricably driven and woven together.
Yeah, and they interlock between the two, between race and class, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you guys are just joining the live today, we are here talking with Ted Burnett. And please like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video out if you've been enjoying it. So Ted, since we've been talking about, you know, race and class, what is your role and responsibility as being VP of the NAACP Pomona Division?
And see, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Yep.
And so we represent all people of color and anyone who's been discriminated against, whatever color they are, because discrimination knows no boundaries when people are oppressed. And so we not only are the watchdogs of the people of color, but we stand up, file lawsuits, file complaints, go to school boards meetings, city council meetings, and every type of governmental meetings, so that we can keep an eye on making sure that people are doing the right things for social, economic, and environmental justice. And people talk about, hold on, Ted, you just said environmental justice. And environmental justice is actually one of the pillars of the Poor People's Campaign, because environmental justice and pollution and putting oil wells, pumps in the neighborhoods, and power lines by the neighborhoods, all of those affect people of color and minorities and the poor, because they're always putting them in those neighborhoods. And so when you have pollution and you build more warehouses in the poor neighborhoods, that pollution gets and causes health problems, and it perpetuates the denigration of the people of color, and especially Blacks, because if you already don't have access to proper health care, and you don't have your basic needs to be able to do that, and then you have pollution and trucks going through your neighborhood, oil pumps and the residue of the pumping and power lines, that adds to you not being able to have a mortality rate that's low because of the health problems, along with high blood pressures, diabetes, heart problems, and everything else that are caused by these environments. So we have to be able to make sure that our environment is also good for our children and our elderly and middle-aged people, so that they can be able to continue to live and be a part of society. So it's all about doing the right thing. Like I keep saying, it is not about left versus right. It's about right versus wrong, and it's a moral issue. Because you can't be concerned. You see, a lot of people on the right are concerned about three things: anti-gay, anti-abortion, and pro-prayer in the schools. They embrace that with their Christian nationalism, and they say, oh, we need to make sure we support candidates through that. But then when you tell them, what about the other teachings of Jesus that he says about the poor and the downtrodden and the widows and the orphans and everything else like that? What about those scriptures? But they don't want to remember about those scriptures. They don't want to remember the scriptures about people, about race and racism and treating people different. You love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah, but that's kind of a lot of how, you know, religious people are. They pick and choose what they want to choose. People pick and choose what works for them, right? And it seems like when I asked about being a vice president of the NAACP, you kind of went back to Poor People's Campaign. So I'm assuming a lot of the issues kind of cross, and the things kind of cross a lot. So going back to the NAACP, is reparations on the table, and why, if it is or is not?
If you study through history and study about the United States benefiting from free labor and wealth and being able to purchase land from France and England in the United States and Spain, the Louisiana Purchase and all of that, they wouldn't have been able to purchase that land if they had to pay wages to those people. And so we became the richest nation in the world off the backs of the slaves, off of slavery. So if you look at all the money that was accumulated then to purchase and to do everything, and the Industrial Revolution and everything, and they never got paid, where's the point of you reimbursing people for the work that they've done? Where is the work that's being done in the reparations for Native Americans when you stole their land and killed the buffalo and slaughtered and genocide? Where is that? And so there has to be a way to reward people for the work that their ancestors done. And so California is done a good job with the Reparations Committee and going on, but they got to go to the next step. You know, the next step is, how do you pay for that? And does it have to be money? I know Evanston, Illinois, they implemented part of reparations. It can go into anything from down payments on homes, children's education, paying for schooling, free community college program need to be expanded. It can go through many ways, but America has a lot of good angels, but a lot of bad demons. And some way, if we're the godly nation that we say we are, we need to take care and right the wrongs that has happened over the years. Because no one can say that America has not benefited from slavery.
Yeah, and
unless they want to revisit history.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned, because I think a lot of people, it's a big debate obviously happening right now between giving people reparations, and I like how you mentioned thinking about there's other ways to give it. Some people talk about, hey, just no longer making Afro-Americans get taxed or go to school for free or whatever. Like, those are cool opportunities and changes. As you being co-founder of the Ontario Future Alliance, can you tell us what is the Ontario Future Alliance and how you became co-founder of it?
So when a lot of cities around California have districts where they vote in the mayor, city council race and everything else. And we didn't have any districts here. So Chris Robles and got together and with a lot of community groups and fought that and threatened a lawsuit with the Attorney General that it wasn't representing underrepresented people. And so in getting together all those community groups, we had to review. Once the city decided that they weren't going to fight us on it, we had to come together and help redraw maps on how the districts are going to be so that we wouldn't leave out the people who was underrepresented. And so we got together with NAACP, the Poor People's Campaign, LULAC, the Civil Rights Latino Organization, the Malo, which is the Tongan group, and different other organizations, and we worked on maps to redraw the districts. And so once the map that we pushed for got approved, this is the first year, this year 2024, that we have districts now. And so all those groups that was working together on the redistricting, we said, why should we disband or dissipate? We need to stay together because we have so many things in common, we need to come together to fight for other injustices that come up around our area. And so myself and Melissa May, who's officer in LULAC, came together and formed the Ontario Futures Alliance. So any injustice that goes on, we fight for it. Anything that's not right, we fight for it. We provide healthcare pop-ups in different areas of Ontario to have free mammograms. We give away free food, backpacks. We had gave away free toys to children, and we continue to fight and for the community, because people used to look for government to take care of, stand in the gap, in the social services gap, but now community groups have to do it, because our vested interest is not to influence people by votes or anything else. It's to help people be able to understand that there's a right way of doing things. And if everybody pitches in to take care of those social services type of things and to make sure that people are healthy and everything else, then they will have a voice. And we are the voice for the people who don't have voices.
I love that. Voice for the voiceless. It's always good to have that. It's so great. I was going to ask about your former experience as deputy director, but I rather would ask this, which is, we got a lot into, what you do for the community, how you got into activism and things like that. But Ted, what is something that most people, even close friends, don't know about you?
I'm an ordained minister.
Okay.
And I'm the acting pastor at my church, but I don't really like organized religion.
Can you explain?
I think it's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ that you should have, and that's between you and him. And when you get into organized religion, then you have this religion telling you that you can do this, and then this religion can do that. And that's what has led to Christian nationalism, where people are saying, oh, I believe in these three things: anti-abortion, anti-gay, and pro-prayer in the schools. And so when you get to those things and you start formulating, then you only want people who look like you to worship with you. And that's how that Jesus don't get out like that. You know that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in out of the 7 weeks in the week, out of the days, because that's when people who look the same, believe the same, all come together to worship the same. When there should be Blacks, white, Latinos, Asian, Jews, Gentiles, all in the congregation of what Jesus fought for. And so I don't get into formal religion where you are going to point fingers at people, because that's why people are turned off the religion these days, because people are always trying to preach to them and tell them that you're going to burn in hell. I'm not saying there's no hell, because there is in my belief system, but there's a way to love your neighbor as you love themselves. And if you go and do something for someone and it added, and your motives and intentions are pure, and you do it out of the goodness of your heart, you have already supplanted what Jesus wanted us to do.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's very crucial to love thy neighbor as you love thyself. I think that's a very great message left by Yeshua. And I guess I have to ask, since you are a retired deputy director of the SEIU, can you tell us a little bit about how it was, and maybe an interesting story or two when you're in that work?
Being the deputy director of the SEIU Local 1000, which is the largest public sector union in California, over 100,000 members, we represented and bargained contracts for EDD, DMV, Highway Patrol, prison, food and ag, fish and game, and all type of prisons and parole. And we represented people from the Oregon border to the Mexican border. That's how big we were. And so
Wow.
we made sure that people's rights under the contract to have a collective bargaining agreement was upheld and enforced, and to make sure we teach people to know your rights in the workplaces, because there are rules and regulations against disparate treatment and discrimination and everything else like that, and there are rules that have to follow through the civil service rules. And so when we continue to fight, and I worked for 27 years for them, we continue to fight to make sure that people had a job, that they can take care of their family and take care of everything. And one of my great stories was when we had budgetary problems in 2007, 2008, and 2009 in the state of California. And during that time, Governor Schwarzenegger was the governor, and he was going to get rid of our workers' jobs, and because of the budget, he was going to pay the workers federal minimum wage at that time, which is $6.55 an hour, and it was an outrage because nobody could go from making a good wage to $6.55 just because the state government couldn't balance their budget. So we went around picketing the governor at every viewpoint he was at. We picketed his house in LA. When his movie came out, we picketed his movie at the movie theaters, and we got him at the Capitol and everything else like that. And one of my greatest glory is when we got kicked out of the Capitol by Schwarzenegger, and I had said something smart like, "How's Maria doing?" He said, "Get out, get out, get out." And he kicked us out of the Capitol and everything else like that. And I yelled to him, why are all your security guards look like Aryan? Why are they blue eyes, blonde hair and blue eyes? And I was just getting under his skin with that. But that was one of the greatest things when we got kicked out the Capitol and stuff for protesting and everything else like that.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Wow. And you guys, how are you guys able to get his home address? That's so wild.
Oh yeah, but people, listen, SEIU 1000 is just one of the sister locals of SEIU. We have locals that represents United Healthcare Workers, County of LA workers, County of Riverside workers, County of Stanislaus workers. So we have like 12 or 13 different locals that represent city, municipal, state workers and everything else. So we always stand together, and if we need a fight against one, is a fight against all. So when he's cutting the budget, he not only is affecting state workers, it's always also affecting other workers in other sectors, public sectors of the county and municipal. So we used our research and found everything and found out where he was going to be, and we was there at every moment.
Probably one of his maids were like, nope. You got a hold of one of his maids and came in and got it that way. It's probably what happened. Super cool. Ted, I want to thank you so much for being on the Empire. What are some of the current projects that you're working
on? We are working on a lot of environmental justice stuff with different organizations to educate the public about pollution and how pollution works, and how pollution is not only air pollution, but it's built pollution also. When built pollution is, they're building warehouses around areas that used to be farmland, and people don't have access to that anymore. And then another pollution is social pollution, on how it affects people of color and poor people to be able to live in a good environment and to have clean water. You surprised how many people, Flint is not the only place that don't have clean water. And that's a constitutional right. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. And that's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the pursuit of happiness is having health care, having access to clean water in this country. They're one of the richest countries in the world, and people don't have access. So we're educating people on that. We're going to do some pop-ups for health care and dental for the community. And we're still working on making sure that people who are elected officials, that they still want to do the right thing and elected to do the right thing. And one of the main things that we're working on has to do with the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to be able to put some teeth back into the Voting Rights Act, because it was gutted by the 5-4 Shelby decision that took the teeth out of our voting rights. And voter suppression is real, and if people don't understand that, it's a real thing. And so being able to be born in the year that I was born, a lot of people in the United States didn't even have access to be able to vote. And after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed, it was gutted all through the years. And so we need better and stronger language. And we ask Congress and the Biden administration to push forth the John Lewis Voting Rights Act so that we can have protections, so we can practice our constitutional rights of voting.
Can you explain a little bit for people who may not know what the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is? Can you explain that a little bit more for us?
So, and not going into the weeds, the 5-4 Shelby decision took the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act from the federal government and put it to the states. And in the states, which are southern states like Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia, they practice using the old Jim Crow Act of if you don't have an ID, you can't vote. If you limited the amount of voting areas in the minority neighborhoods, like 4 years ago, there might have been 160. Now there's only 40, limiting in those votes. Voter intimidation, voter misinformation.
What's intimidation?
Intimidation, standing outside the voting rights, saying if you vote in it, we're going to beat you up. Some people in some states, they have open carry, and they intimidate people that way. They send people the wrong addresses, all types of camouflage so that people won't be able to vote. And the John Lewis vote put some of those things that was taken out with the 5-4 Shelby decision versus Shelby versus Holder, and put some teeth in the enforcement that everybody has a right to vote. It's easier to get a gun card than it is to get an ID to vote in some areas. And then the point about if you have been in trouble with the law, you don't have rights to vote, and it's just a lot of things that they are reintroducing, but it's the same, as we say, same grocery, different bag from Jim Crow in the 1800s.
Gotcha. I was gonna mention the same shit, different day, as they say.
Yeah.
I was gonna mention, like,
I didn't want to say that because my mother's listening.
Oh, Mama, you've heard the word before. You've heard it before. Thanks for being here, Mama. I was gonna ask you too about the thing about felons, right? If you're a felon, if you have a felony, you can't vote either, right? That's correct, right?
Right. And so there are through the Attorney General's office and the district attorneys in many different cities, California expungement law, and that you can find ways to say that you want to vote, and then they would help you expunge your record so that you're able to vote. And there are some also things that they're working on in California, that they are going to allow people who are incarcerated to vote, because some people are under misdemeanors, but if they're locked up, they don't have access to voting. So there's a lot of programs that people are working on so that people have a right to vote.
Wow. Do when it comes to like the voter suppression, the voter intimidation, sometimes sometimes the box is too far for people to drive, like in rural areas. Isn't mail-in ballots a way to fix that problem?
That's a way, as a symptom that gives people access, but some people only believe in voting in person. And, like somebody in my generation, I'm gonna vote on my deathbed because I've seen and lived when my parents didn't have the right to vote and had to fight to be able to vote. So we want to have if we want to have equal representation under the law and everybody have a right to be able to vote, then there should be mail-in ballots. There should be access to voting. There should be more polling places. There should be mobile voting. There should be all different ways to be able to feed in so that people can vote. I want to push that voting day is a national holiday. Then you don't have to worry about that. If it's a national holiday, then everybody's off work, and then the momentum goes up of people having access to voting. But the system don't want that, because then there are much more when the people of color, blacks, white, poor whites, Latinos, and everything else come together, we can outvote everybody. So they don't want people to be able to vote or have access to voting because they know they will lose.
Yeah, and also the youth aren't voting. I remember talking about Melissa May about that, is that the youth aren't voting. So they're also having that whole demographic that's missing from making a political change as well.
Right. But that's when the education piece, where people like my generation or the next generation need to educate them on where we came from, because they don't teach all of that in the schools like they normally do. If you watch the video of Fannie Lou Hamer and Emmett Till and Viola Luusa and the 4 little girls in the Birmingham church who got killed, if you watch those videos and learn about history, then your voting is not only for you, but for the shoulders that you stood on for the past generations. Yeah. And if it's not about you, it's about serving the people who came before you so that they can understand how important it is.
Yeah, and paving a way for the people in front of you.
Exactly.
And so I guess a good question is that the school government educational process? I mean, is that the school educational's role to teach about Black history, or is that Black Americans' responsibility to teach about Black history?
I think the curriculum needs to be upgraded because it don't go far enough with Black history, because Black history is not Black history. This American history. There would be no America without the Blacks. Period. So I think that they should change the curriculum and upgrade it so it tells more of the truth. A good book is called Lies My Teacher Taught Me. It's a great book because you have to refocus what they taught you and reprogram it and unlearn what you've learned to be able to put the truth back in your mind. And so I think it's inherent upon the educational system, but it's also inherent upon every family to teach history as a mandatory thing so that your next generation can learn. That's how I got taught. It wasn't taught when I was young. It was a bunch of lies. We all thought that the Indians scalped the cowboys and they were bad. That's what I got taught in school. But my mother, through the community and through all the people who got help who helped get teachers, because I had Black instructors in my school that my mother worked on the school board to help get elected. And, Miss Dorothy Shelley, who was a librarian who spent time with me. In junior high, I had a Black principal, Dr. Young, and a Black vice principal, Mr. Mears, Henry Mears. I would have never had those if I didn't have that guidance and instruction because of my mother working for to get Black instructors in. I would have never had the foundation to know what I can do or not do.
Yeah. You want to give a shout out to your mom since she's listening?
Hey, shout out to Dr. Evelyn Burnett Underwood, and shout out to Bishop King James Underwood, who's the foundation of who made me who I am today.
Amen. And I I think it's definitely important for any, and because I think other ethnicities do this, but I think it's about they teach themselves their culture. They make sure they do, and so I think it's important to. I think that's where if we're talking about Black Americans, I think that's where they lack a lot is they don't know how to. They don't teach their history. Like if I talk to someone who's 14 right now, I'm like, hey, do you know who Thelonious Monk is? They'd be like, what are you talking about? And do you know who James Earl Jones is? And these are celebrities, from the past, but they wouldn't know the history. But that's another day. And what I think a lot of Mexicanos are very lucky about is that Mexico is right down the street. So if you wanted to get some Mexican history or anything like that, you can just go down the street and you can literally be in Mexico and get some history and stuff like that. So I think that's a lot of benefit for los Mexicanos. They can experience that type of benefit. But Ted, I want to thank you so much for being on the Empire, man. Let's say that 100 years pass by, 250 years pass by, half a millennia passes by. What would you like your empire to look like a half a millennia from now, whether it's community work, activism, speaking the word of God? What would you like your empire to look like 500 years from now?
That everyone love one another, and a kind word goes a long way. And if we start one person by one person caring about other people, then it'll be practice and it'll be muscle memory. Because we got too much division and hate in this country right now, and it's driving people to be out of their minds and not making good decisions. So if we start by just being nice to another human being, we can start there.
I love that. And it's so true. So kindness goes so far. Kindness goes a lot farther than being rude and being an a-hole, as they say. You know, Ted, I want to thank you so much for being on the Empire. For people who want to support the work that you're doing, they want to be involved, be in any of these organizations, can you please tell everybody how they can find you, contact you, and work with you?
Yes, you can contact me through my mini organization at tedmail2@yahoo.com. Tedmail2, TEDMAIL, the number 2 @yahoo.com is the best way to get into me. And let me say a shout out to someone who's always by my side and puts up with me and the many hours that I put in, my wonderful wife, Tueri, who puts up with me and just encourages me every day to be able to do the right thing.
That's so beautiful. Shout out to her. It's good to have what do they say? A man is as strong as his wife that's next to him type of thing. It's a man's world.
Yeah.
There ain't nothing. See, if I sing that song to a 14-year-old, they're like, what are you singing? But James Brown, shout out to James
Brown. Shout out to James Brown.
James Brown did a lot for the community as well. But ladies and gentlemen, I'll also have that information in the description. So if you want to reach out to Ted to support any of his organizations or be a part of it to know more, that'll also be in the description. And so I want to thank Ted for being on. I want to thank all of you guys for tuning in and listening. We learned so much about Ted, about how his mother started off his activism campaign, his activism route. We learned about, how there's voter suppression, voter intimidation that goes on, about the Poor People's Campaign, about over 150 million people who live in poverty, and how the Poor People's Campaign are working on ways to fix that. And things are not just racism, they're classism and how they collide and calamity and things like that. So we learned so much today. And again, I want to thank Ted Burnett for being on. I want to thank all you guys for listening and tuning in. Please like the video if you haven't, comment down below, subscribe to the channel. We have more great guests and things to talk about. If you guys didn't know, my name is Antonio D. Miles. I am the host. And so we do this as much as we can, and we appreciate everybody. We're trying to grow. If you guys want to support the channel, support the work, there's a CASHAPP, $THEE Empire Podcast. and a bunch of other stuff in the link in the description if you guys want to help support the podcast. And again, I want to thank all of you guys for listening, for having Ted on. And other than that, we will catch all of you guys in the next episode. All right? Peace.